The first call came at 9:42 a.m. My mother's name lit up my screen like it always did, soft, harmless, familiar. But her voice wasn't soft. It was shaking. "Did you buy something yesterday?" she asked. I looked out at the skyline from the floor-to-ceiling windows of my new office and let the silence stretch. "Yes," I said, "I did." There was another voice in the background. My father's, low, angry, panicked. "The bank called us," she whispered. "They said there's a transaction for $3.8 million under your name." I closed my eyes, and for the first time in my life, I didn't rush to explain myself. Because 2 days earlier, at Thanksgiving dinner, they had called me unemployed. Publicly, loudly, proudly. Welcome to my YouTube channel. This is my story of betrayal, and if you've ever trusted the wrong person, hit that subscribe button, because you are not alone. Here is how it happened. I was reading comments on my YouTube videos the other day, and I realized I wasn't the only one who had been underestimated by the very people who were supposed to believe in us the most. But this was different. This wasn't just doubt. This was humiliation served with cranberry sauce. Thanksgiving at my parents' house had always followed the same script. My mom obsessing over the turkey like it was a NASA launch. My dad pacing with a glass of red wine, pretending he wasn't stressed. My older brother Mark talking about his promotion before anyone asked. And me? I was the creative one, which is a polite family code for "we have no idea what you do." For 3 years, I'd been building something, quietly, relentlessly. Nights when everyone thought I was still figuring it out, mornings when they assumed I was sleeping in. I wasn't unemployed. I was building. But they didn't see the meetings. They didn't see the investors. They didn't see the rejections. They only saw that I didn't wear a suit to dinner. Halfway through the meal, my Aunt Carol asked the question, "So what are you up to these days?" I swallowed a bite of mashed potatoes and started to answer, but my father cut in. "Oh, she's between things right now, still trying to find something stable." The table went quiet for half a second, just long enough for the word to settle. Unemployed. I felt heat crawl up my neck. "I'm not unemployed," I said carefully. My dad laughed. "Well, when you're not bringing in consistent income, sweetheart, that's usually what we call it." A few cousins looked down at their plates. My brother smirked. And my mother, she didn't defend me. She just sipped her wine like it was background noise. That moment, that was the fracture. Because they weren't asking what I was building, they were announcing what I wasn't. Here's the part they didn't know. 3 weeks earlier, I had signed the final paperwork. After 2 years of pitching and refining and being told, "come back when you're more experienced," a venture capital firm in London wired the funding. It wasn't a startup anymore. It was a company, my company. And on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, I had finalized the purchase of a commercial building downtown to house our headquarters. $3.8 million, paid in full. The irony? The reason the bank called my parents that Monday morning was because I had kept my primary mailing address listed at their house. Old habits, safety nets. The transaction alert had gone to them. They thought it was fraud. They thought I had somehow made a mistake. They thought I couldn't possibly be capable of that kind of move. Because in their world, I was still the daughter between things. Back at Thanksgiving, after the laughter died down, my dad leaned back in his chair. "You know," he said, gesturing with his fork, "there's no shame in taking a real job while you figure out your hobbies." Hobbies. 2 years of 4 a.m. mornings reduced to a hobby. I looked around the table. No one challenged him. No one asked what I actually did. They had already decided the narrative, and I realized something terrifying in that moment. If I defended myself, it would sound desperate. If I stayed silent, it would look like agreement. So I chose something else. I smiled. "Don't worry," I said softly. "I have a plan." My brother snorted. "Sure you do." That was the moment I stopped explaining. Now, 2 days later, my mother's voice trembled through the phone. The bank thinks it's suspicious. They asked if you're being scammed. I walked across the marble floor of the lobby I now owned. Employees were assembling desks upstairs. My logo, 12 feet wide, was being mounted behind the reception area. "I'm not being scammed," I said. My father grabbed the phone. "What on earth did you do?" There it was. Not "how did you do it?" Not "we're proud of you." What did you do? As if success had to be a crime. I let the silence stretch again. Then I said the one sentence that changed everything. "I bought a building." Dead air. My dad actually laughed. "No, seriously." "I am serious." Another pause. "For what?" he demanded. "For my company." Silence shifted into something else. Disbelief. Because if my company was real, then Thanksgiving hadn't just been awkward, it had been wrong. And that realization was just beginning to dawn on them when my father said something that made my stomach drop. "Come home," he said. "We need to see proof." Proof. Not congratulations, not curiosity. Proof. And that was the moment I understood. They didn't want to celebrate me. They wanted to catch me lying. I looked up at the glass balcony overlooking the lobby. My COO waved from upstairs holding a blueprint. The future was literally being built around me, and yet my parents thought I was unemployed. "I'll come by tonight," I said, but I wasn't going to bring proof. I was going to bring something much bigger, because they weren't the only ones who had underestimated me, and by the end of that night, the entire family narrative was going to collapse. I didn't drive to my parents' house right away. Instead, I stood in the center of the empty lobby and listened to the echo of my own footsteps. The building smelled like fresh paint and ambition. Sunlight poured through the high windows, catching the dust in the air like floating gold. 3 floors, 28 offices, a rooftop terrace overlooking the river. All mine. No, not mine. Ours. The team that had believed when belief was expensive. I ran my fingers along the cool stone reception desk and thought about Thanksgiving again. The way my father's voice carried across the table when he said, "real job." The way my brother's promotion got applause. The way my mother avoided eye contact when I corrected the word unemployed. The humiliation hadn't been loud. It had been casual. That's what made it sting. My phone buzzed again. Mark. I almost didn't answer. "What's going on?" he asked without greeting. "Dad's freaking out. He says you're in some kind of financial mess." I leaned against the wall and stared at the unfinished logo installation. "I'm not in a mess." "Then why is the bank calling about millions of dollars?" "Because I outgrew the version of me you were comfortable with." But I didn't say that. "I told them," I said calmly. "I bought a building." He laughed, sharp, disbelieving. "With what money?" There it was again, the assumption that I was playing pretend. "With my company's capital." Another pause. "You don't have a company." I closed my eyes. "Yes," I said quietly, "I do." Here's what no one in my family understood. When I moved back home 3 years ago, it wasn't failure, it was strategy. Rent-free living meant runway. Runway meant time. Time meant leverage. While they thought I was figuring things out, I was studying markets at midnight. I was taking investor calls at dawn to match time zones. I was building a fintech platform designed for small businesses that banks routinely ignored. The irony? My parents had always complained about banks, hidden fees, unfair lending practices, dismissive advisors. I built a solution for people like them. And the London firm that funded us, they saw what my family didn't, scalability. By the time I pulled into my parents' driveway that evening, the sky had turned indigo. Every light in the house was on. That alone told me this wasn't casual curiosity, this was interrogation. My mother opened the door before I knocked. She looked smaller somehow, worried. "Are you in trouble?" she whispered. "No." She searched my face like she was looking for cracks. My father stood in the living room, arms crossed. Mark leaned against the kitchen counter, scrolling on his phone, but clearly listening. The TV was muted. They were waiting. "Sit," my dad said. Not, "How are you?" Not, "Explain." Just, "Sit." I remained standing. "You said you needed proof. Proof of what?" "That you didn't do something reckless, that you're not drowning in debt." Mark chimed in. "You don't just buy a building out of nowhere." I steadied their faces. Fear disguised as authority. "You're right," I said. "You don't." I pulled out my phone and opened the email thread. Investment confirmation, property acquisition contract, wire transfer receipt. I turned the screen toward them. My father squinted. "What am I looking at?" "Series A funding, closed last month." Silence. Mark stepped closer. "That number can't be real." "It is." My mother's hand covered her mouth. "How much?" she asked softly. $7 million. The room shifted. Because $7 million wasn't a hobby. My father sank slowly into the armchair. "You never said." "You never asked." That landed heavier than I intended, but it was true. They had assumed, they had labeled, they had reduced. Not once in 2 years had my father said, "Show me what you're building." Not once had my brother asked to see the platform. Instead, they joked about my laptop job. "Why didn't you tell us?" my mother asked. I hesitated, because the real answer was ugly. Because every time I tried, it turned into advice about getting something stable. My father looked defensive. "We were worried." Worried or embarrassed. That hit. Mark straightened. "That's not fair." "Isn't it?" I asked. "At Thanksgiving, you announced I was unemployed. That's basically what it looked like." "It looked like that because you refused to see anything else." The air grew thick. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the youngest trying to earn approval. I was the one holding leverage, and they felt it. My father cleared his throat. "So this building," he said cautiously, "where is it?" "Downtown." "For exactly what?" "Headquarters." Mark's eyes widened. "You have employees?" 11, hiring 6 more next quarter. The silence that followed wasn't disbelief anymore. It was recalibration. My mother sat down slowly. "You mean you've been successful this whole time?" I almost laughed. Success isn't a light switch. It's a staircase no one sees you climb. "I've been working," I said. My father rubbed his temples. "And the bank called us because my mailing address was still here." He nodded slowly. "So this isn't fraud?" "No. It's yours." "Yes." For a moment, I saw something fragile in his expression. Pride trying to push through ego. But ego is stubborn. "You should have told us," he said again. "I told you," I replied quietly. "You just translated it as delusion." Mark looked down at his phone, suddenly very interested in nothing. Then my father said something that caught me off guard. "Why didn't you ask for help?" I blinked. "Help with what?" "With business, with connections. I've known people in finance for years." I studied him. "You mean the same finance world that told you startups are gambling?" He didn't answer, because that had been his exact phrase when I first mentioned entrepreneurship. The truth hovered between us. They hadn't believed in me because belief required risk, and risk wasn't something our family handled well. Stability was worshipped, titles were currency, predictability was safety. I had broken all 3 rules. My mother finally stood and walked toward me. She reached for my hands. "I'm sorry," she whispered. That almost broke me, because I didn't want revenge, I wanted recognition. And apologies from parents feel heavier than applause from strangers. But before the moment could settle, Mark said the one thing that shifted everything again. "So, how much of that 7 million is actually yours?" There it was. Not celebration, calculation. I looked at him steadily. "Enough." He exhaled through his nose. "Must be nice." And suddenly I understood. This wasn't just about underestimation. It was about hierarchy. In our family, Mark was the golden child, the corporate success, the predictable win. If I had surpassed him without their guidance, without their blueprint, then the structure tilted, and people don't like when structures tilt. My father stood again. "Well," he said stiffly, "congratulations." It sounded like swallowing glass. "Thank you," I replied, but I could feel it. The congratulations weren't warm, they were strategic, because if I was powerful now, they needed to reposition. As I walked toward the door, my mother called after me, "Will you bring us to see it?" I paused. This was the moment. I could say yes and offer them a guided tour, or I could say something else, because part of me remembered the Thanksgiving table, the laughter, the word unemployed echoing like a verdict. I turned slowly. "You'll see it. Soon." My father frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" I smiled, because what I hadn't told them yet, what none of them knew, was that the building purchase was phase 1, and tomorrow morning at 10 a.m., I had a press conference scheduled, one that would put my name and my company into every financial publication in the city, including the one my father read religiously. And when that article dropped, the story wouldn't belong to them anymore. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was anxious, because I was clear. There's a strange kind of stillness that comes when you realize you no longer need permission. I had spent years chasing approval in subtle ways, dropping hints about meetings, casually mentioning growth metrics, hoping someone would lean in and ask for more. No one ever did. Now, suddenly, they were leaning forward, and I wasn't sure I wanted to feed them the full story. At 8:30 a.m., I stood in the conference room on the 3rd floor of the building. Glass walls, city skyline, a long oak table that smelled faintly of polish and possibility. My COO, Daniel, was pacing. "You good?" he asked. "Better than good." He studied my face carefully. "You look different." "I am. Because something shifts when the people who underestimated you finally realize they were wrong. It doesn't make you taller, it makes you steadier." The press conference wasn't flashy. It didn't need to be. A handful of financial journalists, a local business podcast, a tech blogger with a loyal following. But the announcement mattered. We weren't just launching a fintech platform anymore. We were announcing our official headquarters, our Series A funding, and, this was the part that would ripple, we were unveiling our partnership with a mid-sized regional bank willing to pilot our small business lending model. The same type of bank my father had spent years complaining about. The irony wasn't lost on me. At 9:55 a.m., I stepped up to the podium. Cameras adjusted, microphones blinked red. For a split second, I thought about Thanksgiving again, the clink of silverware, the word unemployed hanging over the table like a stain. And then I spoke. 3 years ago, I moved back home with a laptop and an idea. Today, I'm proud to announce that idea has grown into a company committed to changing how small businesses access capital. I didn't mention my parents. I didn't mention humiliation, but I let the subtext live in my posture. We were here. We were real. We were funded. When the announcement ended, applause filled the room. Not thunderous, but respectful. Journalists approached with questions about scalability, risk models, projected growth. No one asked if this was a hobby. No one asked if I was between things. They asked about expansion timelines. Respect sounds different when it's earned in public. At 10:42 a.m., my phone vibrated in my pocket. "Dad." I let it ring. Then again, and again. By the time I checked my notifications, I had 6 missed calls from him, 2 from my mom, and 1 from Mark. The article had already gone live. The headline read, "Local founder secures $7 million to disrupt small business lending." There was a photo of me standing in the lobby, confident, composed, not unemployed. I called back an hour later. My father answered on the first ring. "Why didn't you tell us about the press conference?" His voice wasn't angry, it was rattled. "Because it wasn't about you," I said calmly. Silence. "He had to hear about it from Frank," he said. Frank, his golf buddy, the one who reads financial news before breakfast. "I imagine that was surprising," I replied. "That's one word for it." My mother got on the line. "We're proud of you," she said quickly, as if trying to secure the moment before it slipped away. I believed her, but pride after proof feels different than pride before risk. "Thank you," I said. Then my father said something that changed the temperature entirely. "Frank wants to know if you're taking on private investors." I blinked. "Excuse me?" "He says he'd like to get in early." There it was. Not just recalibration, opportunity detection. I felt something cold settle in my chest. 3 days ago, I was the daughter who needed stability. Now I was a potential asset. "Series A is closed," I said evenly. "Future rounds will be structured formally." Meaning, I'm not taking informal investments. "You're turning down money?" "I'm protecting the cap table." He didn't understand that, and for the first time, I didn't rush to simplify it for him. That evening, Mark showed up at the building unannounced. He stood in the lobby staring at the logo like it was a mirage. "Wow," he muttered. I walked down the stairs slowly. "Didn't think it was real?" "I didn't think it was this." We stood in silence for a moment. "I told you I had a plan." He shoved his hands in his pockets. "Yeah." He didn't apologize. Mark doesn't do apologies. Instead, he asked, "What's your salary?" Of course he did. I almost smiled. "Competitive." He exhaled sharply. "I've been at my company for 8 years." "I know. And you just," he gestured around, "skipped ahead." That was it. That was the wound. Not that I succeeded, that I did it differently. I didn't skip anything. I just climbed a staircase you couldn't see. He didn't respond, because deep down he knew. Over the next week, something strange happened. My parents began calling more often, but not to criticize, to ask questions. What does a valuation mean? What's equity? How does lending risk get calculated? Curiosity replaced commentary, but underneath it, I sensed something else. Adjustment. They were rewriting the story of me in real time, and rewriting takes effort. Then Sunday came. Family dinner. Smaller this time, just immediate family. I almost declined, but I went, because avoiding them would mean the past still had power. The table was quieter than usual. My father cleared his gourd halfway through the meal. "I may have mischaracterized your situation at Thanksgiving." That was as close as he could get to admitting fault. "I may have allowed that," I replied softly. He looked at me sharply. "You're not blameless in this." "I know." I stopped explaining. And why was that? Because explaining to people committed to misunderstanding you is exhausting. But I didn't say it like that. Because I realized I didn't need everyone to believe in me for it to work. Silence. Heavy. Honest. Then my mother said something unexpected. "I told Aunt Carol about your company," she said gently. I felt a flicker of something complicated. It wasn't about Aunt Carol. It was about the public correction. Humiliation had happened publicly. Recognition was now happening publicly. Balance. But just as the evening began to soften, my father leaned forward. "There's something else," he said. His tone shifted. Serious. "What do you mean?" "The bank didn't just call about the transaction." My chest tightened. "What do you mean?" "They flagged something else." The room felt smaller. "What?" He hesitated. "They said someone tried to access your account details using our address." Cold, sharp, immediate. "Who?" I asked. They wouldn't say. Mark looked up slowly. That doesn't sound random. No, it didn't, because the address on file was theirs, and very few people knew about the transaction before it went public, which meant one of two things. Either someone had been watching quietly, or someone at that Thanksgiving table hadn't just underestimated me, they'd tried to verify or exploit what they thought was weakness. And suddenly, this wasn't just about pride, it was about trust. The rest of Sunday passed in a blur of quiet tension. I tried to focus on the laughter of my younger cousins, the clatter of dishes, the faint smell of roasted turkey, but beneath it all, a thread of unease wound around my chest. My father's words about the attempted access to my account replayed endlessly. Someone had been poking into my life, and the timing was too precise to be coincidence. I excused myself after dinner and walked out to the backyard. The late afternoon sun was pale, brushing the treetops with orange light. I took a deep breath, letting it settle around me, steadying the rapid pulse in my wrists. The first thought that hit me, it had to be someone with access, someone who knew my habits, my movements, maybe even my family's schedule. A neighbor? No. An investor leak? Unlikely. Someone at the dinner table? My mind recoiled at the idea. Could someone I trusted, or someone I had trusted, be digging into my accounts? I pulled out my phone and checked the banking app. Everything appeared normal. No missing funds, no irregular transactions, but the flags remained. Alerts were active for any future activity. Someone had probed, and they'd been caught. I realized something critical in that moment. This was bigger than family tension, bigger than pride or misjudgment. This was about control, about people testing whether I was real, whether my achievements were legitimate. Monday morning arrived like a silent storm. I arrived at the office early, already dressed in my usual mix of tailored casual, black jeans, crisp white shirt, a blazer I didn't wear often because I rarely needed it. Daniel greeted me with a nod. "Looks like your dad called again," he said softly. "Yes," I said, "twice overnight." He raised an eyebrow. "Are we talking Thanksgiving fallout or something else?" "Something else," I replied. I didn't elaborate. Not yet. I knew better than to mix personal chaos with business logistics, especially not with Series A investors expecting precise execution. The team gathered for the morning briefing, 11 people, each hand-picked, each invested in the mission as much as I was. Today's agenda? Finalize the pilot contracts, confirm onboarding for the 6 new hires, and double-check compliance protocols for the bank partnership. As I ran through the spreadsheet, the subtle buzz of my phone in my pocket reminded me the personal and professional worlds were colliding, and unlike before, I wasn't worried about judgment, I was assessing risk. By noon, the emails from journalists had started arriving, interview requests, congratulatory notes, skeptical questions disguised as advice. One in particular made me pause. Subject line, Thanksgiving transaction alert, curious insight needed. I opened it. The sender was anonymous. The content was cryptic, hinting at knowledge of the bank's alert system and the unusual timing of the transaction. My stomach turned. This wasn't curiosity. This was surveillance. I leaned back in my chair, running my hands over the smooth leather. Daniel, noticing my hesitation, came closer. "Something wrong?" I shook my head slowly. "No, something interesting." That night I went home and couldn't sleep, not because of fear, but calculation. Who had tried to access my account? Was it connected to my parents? Could someone have misinterpreted my financial activity and assumed vulnerability? I replayed Thanksgiving over and over. My father's stern posture, Mark's sideways glances, my mother's hesitant touches. Every glance, every phrase, every tiny inflection. Was it possible someone had been watching, not out of malice, but out of suspicion or curiosity? And if they had, what did that say about trust? By Tuesday, I decided to take control. I scheduled a formal review with the bank's fraud department. I wanted full transparency, all logs of access attempts, all IP addresses traced, all notifications explained. They were cooperative but cautious. "We have standard protocols," the representative said. "It appears someone attempted to verify transaction legitimacy from your listed home address. Nothing was compromised, but the system flagged it for investigation." Nothing was compromised, that was good, but flagged meant attention, scrutiny, and, I realized, knowledge of my family address. That was too close, too personal. Daniel and I sat in my office afterward, going over options. We could alert law enforcement, tighten security, even involve private investigators. I considered each path carefully, weighing personal cost versus business integrity. "Risk is always twofold," I said aloud, "the risk of losing funds and the risk of losing control of the narrative." Daniel nodded. "So what's your move?" "I control the narrative," I said firmly. "We escalate security, document everything, and stay ahead. No reaction without strategy." The next week became a study in subtle power. I noticed my parents' behavior shifting almost imperceptibly. Phone calls became measured. Questions were more curious than accusatory. My mother asked about company culture instead of financials. My father wanted insight into investor relations, not my personal spending habits. Mark, predictably, watched quietly, but I could sense his recalculation. He was realizing that my success wasn't just luck, it was strategy, execution, and risk-taking, the very things he had avoided in favor of corporate safety. And yet, lurking beneath that recalibration, I detected tension, pride bruised, control challenged. It was intoxicating. One evening, the moment of confrontation arrived. I had asked my parents to visit the new headquarters, not as a victory lap, but as a subtle lesson. Let them see, but let them feel it on their own terms. They arrived on a gray Wednesday morning. My father, precise as ever, walked in first. My mother followed, tentative, cautious. Mark came last, scrolling his phone, pretending nonchalance. I guided them through the building, showing them the conference room, the open workspace, the server hub. Each step was deliberate, each explanation measured. When we reached the rooftop terrace overlooking the city, I paused. "This," I said, gesturing to the skyline, "is what you didn't see from the Thanksgiving table. Hours, nights, planning, failure, learning, it all builds up to this." My father looked at me, a flicker of something raw behind his eyes. "You actually did it," he said softly. "Yes," I said. Mark finally put his phone away. "This is insane. I had no idea you were this serious." I smiled faintly. "I've always been serious. You just didn't see it." My mother's hand found mine. "I'm proud," she whispered. That was the turning point. Not forgiveness, not celebration, not even full understanding, but recognition. And recognition is heavier than any applause. Because in that moment, I realized the narrative had shifted for my family. It had shifted for me. I no longer had to defend. I no longer had to explain. I only needed to act. But the shadow of the account attempt lingered. It reminded me that achievement attracts attention, sometimes benign, sometimes predatory. It reminded me that family, while precious, can be complex, their perception colored by past assumptions. It reminded me that trust, once fractured, requires careful rebuilding. So I did what any founder would do. I doubled down. Security protocols, investor relations, employee onboarding, media strategy. Every variable was accounted for, every risk anticipated. Because in business and in life, being underestimated is only dangerous if you remain underestimated. And I wasn't. Not anymore. Not ever again. The morning started quietly. Too quietly. I had grown accustomed to the rhythm of high-stakes operations, meetings, calls, press inquiries, investor check-ins, but there was a subtle vibration in the air that told me something was about to break. At 9:15 a.m., Daniel rushed into my office, eyes sharp. "You need to see this." I followed him to the server room where 3 monitors displayed live security feeds and system logs. One alert dominated them all: multiple unauthorized attempts to access the company's internal databases. IP addresses traced locally, but the pattern was sophisticated, almost like someone knew our systems inside and out. "They're not amateurs," Daniel said. "Someone knows exactly what they're doing." I felt the familiar tightening in my chest. Thanksgiving, the bank alerts, the family scrutiny, all of it had led to this moment. The question wasn't if someone was testing me anymore, it was how far they would go. I took a deep breath and ran through options: lockdown protocols, emergency encryption, law enforcement involvement. But then I realized something. The stakes were bigger than financial loss. This was about narrative, perception, and control. If word leaked that our systems had been breached, even partially, the press and investors would amplify it. My family's tentative confidence in me could crumble. My team's trust could waver. Everything I had built might be questioned. I turned to Daniel. "Contain it. No one outside of this room knows. I want every attempt traced, every access logged, every breach mitigated, and prepare for controlled disclosure in case it escalates." He nodded, his jaw tight. "We'll handle it." By noon, I had received a call from the bank. "The alert system shows repeated attempts from multiple sources," the security manager said. "We're escalating to our highest priority. It looks targeted." I clenched the phone. Targeted how? "They're testing access to transaction logs and client data. It's precise, deliberate, and persistent." I exhaled slowly. The realization hit me fully. Someone had been waiting for the right moment. Someone had been monitoring my visibility, my transactions, my family, and my growing public profile. And now they were moving. I called my parents. "Do not engage with any banking inquiries unless it's from me," I instructed. "Do not provide any information. Do not confirm anything. Are we clear?" "Yes," my mother whispered. "We understand." My father's voice was low. "We're worried." "Good," I said evenly. "You should be. This isn't ordinary. Pay attention." Mark, of course, was silent. I could hear him listening in the background. I ended the call and looked out the window at the city skyline. Calm on the surface, chaos beneath. It was familiar territory, stress tempered with strategy. By mid-afternoon, the security team had traced the attempts to multiple local IP addresses and discovered something chilling. One of the attempts had originated within a building I had visited in the past week, my own family's neighborhood. The thought hit me like a jolt. Someone had watched me closely. They knew my patterns, my connections. They had knowledge of my family's location, and now, with my company's growing visibility, they were probing not just for funds, but for vulnerabilities. I had always anticipated risk in business, but this was personal. Daniel and I convened an emergency meeting with the executive team. "This is a high-tension scenario," I said. "We are under scrutiny from an unknown source. No panicking, no guessing. Every action must be deliberate. Treat this like a live threat, not just for finances, but to our credibility." A few minutes into the session, a text alert arrived. Another attempt, timed to coincide with my family's viewing of the new press coverage. The sender of the attempts had intimate knowledge of my schedule. Someone had orchestrated this, carefully monitoring both my personal and professional life. I felt my pulse spike. Not fear, not desperation. Focus. That evening, I decided to confront the situation strategically. I called the bank's fraud department directly, elevating the incident to a full investigation. Simultaneously, I engaged a private cybersecurity firm. They would monitor the activity, trace all connections, and prepare for potential escalation. I instructed Daniel to implement real-time anomaly alerts for every employee account. Everyone in my team knew the stakes, and their focus was unshakable. But control wasn't just about defense, it was about narrative. I decided that whoever was testing me would not be allowed to gain leverage. They would learn that visibility, achievement, and preparation were shielded by strategy. The next morning, news broke. An anonymous post on a small financial forum mentioned the large building purchase and implied possible impropriety. My inbox flooded with messages, journalists, competitors, and curious observers questioning the legitimacy of the transaction. I read through them with a practiced calm. Each message reinforced one truth: perception is only as strong as your preparation, and my preparation had been meticulous. I composed a controlled public statement emphasizing transparency, regulatory compliance, and the official nature of the transaction. By the time the day ended, the narrative had shifted back to recognition and legitimacy, neutralizing the speculative thread. But the personal tension remained. I called my parents again. "This isn't just business," I said. "It's targeted. Someone has been monitoring our family network. You need to remain vigilant. Do not discuss anything financial, do not confirm any transactions, and do not engage with unsolicited inquiries." My father's voice was tight. "We're trying, but it's unsettling." "Good," I replied. "Let that unease sharpen your awareness. Threats exist in subtlety, not just in overt action." I hung up, knowing the real challenge had only begun. By the following week, the security team had traced some access attempts to multiple devices within a small radius. Analysis indicated that the attempts were coordinated, using both social engineering and technical probing. The implication was clear. This was no random attacker. This was someone meticulously assessing vulnerabilities. I realized then that my family's skepticism, my brother's doubts, and even past humiliations had been micro-lessons in resilience. Every misadjustment, every dismissal, every accusation of unemployment had fortified me. And now that resilience was being tested under pressure of direct scrutiny. Late Friday evening, I gathered my executive team for a high-intensity session. "This is the ultimate test of operational control," I said. "You will treat every alert as if it is real. Every login, every access attempt, every external communication will be verified. Failure is not an option. Reputation and security are inseparable. We cannot afford assumption. We can only act decisively." We worked late into the night, triangulating IP addresses, cross-referencing log accesses, and fortifying digital defenses. Daniel kept me updated continuously. Each alert neutralized, each attempt logged, every thread of attack mapped meticulously. By 2 a.m., I leaned back in my chair. Exhaustion was physical, but clarity was mental. I knew that visibility brought scrutiny, scrutiny brought challenge, and challenge, handled correctly, reinforced authority. Saturday dawned clear and bright, but tension still lingered. The press coverage remained neutral, family interactions were measured, and my team was vigilant. I received a call from my father in the early afternoon. "You handled the situation," he said quietly. We are impressed." "Impressed isn't enough," I replied. "You need to understand vigilance and strategy. Recognition is easy. Control is hard." He exhaled. "I understand." My mother's voice followed. "We're proud." And Mark, of course, remained silent, but I knew he was calculating. That night, standing on the rooftop terrace, the city sprawled beneath me like a grid of opportunity and danger. I reflected on the culmination of the past few weeks: Thanksgiving humiliation, the bank alerts, family doubt, public recognition, and now direct external threat. Every moment had led to a single, undeniable truth: success, when visible, is tested relentlessly. But with preparation, strategy, and unwavering focus, scrutiny transforms into opportunity, not weakness. And for the first time, I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. because the lesson was clear. Power, perception, and vigilance are inseparable. The highest stakes always arrive, but when you are prepared, nothing can unseat you. The days after the rooftop brunch became a delicate dance. I had established my authority, proven my capability, and secured public recognition, but influence, I quickly realized, wasn't static. It demanded maintenance, careful calibration, and constant awareness of perception. At the office, everything operated like a well-oiled machine. Investors were checking in, employees were thriving, and my Series A funding allowed us to expand faster than anticipated. But in the quiet moments, between calls, between decisions, I felt the undercurrent of the Thanksgiving fallout still pulling at me. It wasn't about resentment anymore. It was about vigilance. On Monday morning, I received an email flagged as urgent by the bank's fraud monitoring system. Someone had attempted a second unauthorized access, not a breach, but an attempt nonetheless. The IP originated within my city. I stared at the screen, heart tightening. Daniel joined me, his brow furrowed. Same pattern as last time? Yes, I said, but now we know it's local. He whistled softly. That narrows things down. I nodded. It also means someone in my circle or someone with knowledge of my family has been watching. We need to tighten everything, immediately. Within the hour, our IT team implemented advanced monitoring, multi-factor authentication, and anomaly alerts that pinged directly to my phone. Every account, every transaction, every login attempt was now traceable. The message was clear. I see you. I realized something critical. The Thanksgiving humiliation had been personal. The bank alert was professional. Together, they formed a lesson. Trust is fragile, and perception is reality until proven otherwise. I called my parents. We've had another attempt at unauthorized access, I said, careful to keep my tone measured. My mother gasped softly. Again? Are you okay? I'm fine, but this confirms one thing. Visibility attracts scrutiny. I'll handle it. There was silence. And, I added, please keep your mailing address out of any financial correspondence going forward. My father's voice was tight. We will. We didn't realize the risk. Now you do, I said. The tension didn't ease immediately. My family had seen my success, they understood my capability, but they hadn't internalized my independence. Their perspective was recalibrating slowly, and I could sense their unease, like spectators trying to digest a performance that exceeded their expectations. I let them observe. I didn't guide their emotions. They needed to see the consequences of their assumptions. Misjudgment can isolate you. Recognition is earned through action, not permission. Meanwhile, I kept scaling the company. Investors were impressed by the rigorous structure, the precision of growth strategy, and the transparency of operations. We onboarded 3 of the 6 planned hires, expanding our capacity to handle clients who had previously been underserved by traditional banks. Every decision, every email, every meeting reinforced credibility, and with credibility came influence, not just over my team, but over the perception of my family, the press, and industry stakeholders. I had moved from proving myself to controlling the narrative. One evening, Mark stopped by unexpectedly. He leaned against the lobby railing, scanning the office quietly. "You've really built something," he said. I nodded. "We've built something." He hesitated. "I didn't think you could do it like this." I smiled faintly. I didn't either at first, but belief isn't about permission, it's about execution. He considered that. "I might need to learn that," he admitted. "That's the lesson," I said softly. Despite progress, the shadow of trust lingered. The repeated attempts to access my account weren't malicious yet, but they were probing. Someone wanted to know my limits, my resources, and my boundaries, and I had to respond strategically. I implemented a layered approach: digital security, multi-factor authentication, anomaly alerts, encrypted communications, secure backups; physical security, restricting sensitive documents to the building, limiting access to authorized personnel; narrative control, public updates and press releases were structured to highlight growth while minimizing personal vulnerability. Daniel and I reviewed every protocol weekly. Every loophole was sealed. Every assumption about my family's or competitors' knowledge was recalculated. One Friday, I scheduled a video call with one of the London investors. "I heard about the attempted access," she said sharply. "Everything secure?" "Yes," I replied. "We've tightened all systems. It's under control." She nodded. "Good, because the stakes just got higher. Series B planning is around the corner, and any perception of instability can hurt valuations." I smiled faintly. "We're ready." Her approval reinforced my philosophy. Visibility demands vigilance. Recognition without preparation is a liability. The weekend arrived, bringing a strange mix of triumph and reflection. I visited the building early before the team arrived. The lobby was silent. The sunlight streamed through the glass walls, illuminating dust motes like particles of gold. I wandered through the offices, imagining the meetings, decisions, and interactions that had already reshaped my life. Then I paused at the reception desk, the first space I had stood in when my parents called about the bank transaction. I remembered the disbelief in their voices, the assumption that I was incapable, the humiliation of Thanksgiving. And I realized every brick in this building, every system in place, every hire, every deal was a testament not just to skill, but to resilience. Resilience over assumption, execution over opinion, proof over perception. Later that day, I called my parents. "I want you to see the operational side, not just the lobby or press releases, the heart of the company." They arrived cautiously, but with curiosity. My father, usually precise and critical, asked about workflow, reporting, and analytics. My mother inquired about employee well-being and culture. Mark asked about scalability and expansion strategy. I guided them through each department, letting them observe interactions, workflow, and systems. No commentary, no lecturing, just exposure. By the end, they were silent, but the silence was different from before. It was absorption, recognition without apology, understanding without apology. As they left, my father turned to me. "You've exceeded everything I expected," I said. "Not everything you expected, everything I expected of myself." There was a pause. He exhaled. "I see that now." Mark stayed quiet. My mother smiled softly, eyes misted. And I realized something profound. The story of validation wasn't about convincing them. It was about demonstrating that I was capable regardless of their belief. And now, watching them leave, I knew they had learned that lesson. But the bank alert still lingered as a reminder. Someone had tested boundaries, probed for weakness, and watched the Thanksgiving fallout. That experience had taught me that visibility, family recognition, public acknowledgement, investor confidence can attract scrutiny, and handling that scrutiny is the real test of growth. I sat at my desk reviewing security logs. The attempts had been traced, mitigated, and analyzed. No compromise occurred, but the tension underscored an essential truth. Success is not only about achievement, it's about protecting it. And with that protection, control, and visibility, the next chapter of growth was ready to begin. I realized at that moment that Thanksgiving had been more than a test. It had been a crucible. Humiliation had taught me discretion. Disbelief had taught me resilience. Recognition had taught me patience. And the bank alerts had taught me vigilance. Everything, every challenge, every misunderstanding, every misstep had culminated in a single lesson. Power, perception, and preparation are inseparable. Standing alone on the rooftop terrace that evening, city lights twinkling like distant stars, I allowed myself a moment of quiet reflection. The family that once dismissed me now observed me. The world that once overlooked me now acknowledged me. And I, through strategy, resilience, and unwavering execution, had claimed my place. Not just as a successful founder, not just as a daughter who was underestimated, but as a force that could no longer be ignored. The morning started quietly, too quietly. I had grown accustomed to the rhythm of high-stakes operations, meetings, calls, press inquiries, investor check-ins, but there was a subtle vibration in the air that told me something was about to break. At 9:15 a.m., Daniel rushed into my office, eyes sharp. "You need to see this." I followed him to the server room where 3 monitors displayed live security feeds and system logs. One alert dominated them all: multiple unauthorized attempts to access the company's internal databases. IP addresses traced locally, but the pattern was sophisticated, almost like someone knew our systems inside and out. "They're not amateurs," Daniel said. "Someone knows exactly what they're doing." I felt the familiar tightening in my chest. Thanksgiving, the bank alerts, the family scrutiny, all of it had led to this moment. The question wasn't if someone was testing me anymore, it was how far they would go. I took a deep breath and ran through options: lockdown protocols, emergency encryption, law enforcement involvement. But then I realized something. The stakes were bigger than financial loss. This was about narrative, perception, and control. If word leaked that our systems had been breached, even partially, the press and investors would amplify it. My family's tentative confidence in me could crumble. My team's trust could waver. Everything I had built might be questioned. I turned to Daniel. "Contain it. No one outside of this room knows. I want every attempt traced, every access logged, every breach mitigated, and prepare for controlled disclosure in case it escalates." He nodded, his jaw tight. "We'll handle it." By noon, I had received a call from the bank. "The alert system shows repeated attempts from multiple sources," the security manager said. "We're escalating to our highest priority. It looks targeted." I clenched the phone. Targeted how? "They're testing access to transaction logs and client data. It's precise, deliberate, and persistent." I exhaled slowly. The realization hit me fully. Someone had been waiting for the right moment. Someone had been monitoring my visibility, my transactions, my family, and my growing public profile. And now they were moving. I called my parents. "Do not engage with any banking inquiries unless it's from me," I instructed. "Do not provide any information. Do not confirm anything. Are we clear?" "Yes," my mother whispered. "We understand." My father's voice was low. "We're worried." "Good," I said evenly. "You should be. This isn't ordinary. Pay attention." Mark, of course, was silent. I could hear him listening in the background. I ended the call and looked out the window at the city skyline. Calm on the surface, chaos beneath. It was familiar territory, stress tempered with strategy. By mid-afternoon, the security team had traced the attempts to multiple local IP addresses and discovered something chilling. One of the attempts had originated within a building I had visited in the past week, my own family's neighborhood. The thought hit me like a jolt. Someone had watched me closely. They knew my patterns, my connections. They had knowledge of my family's location, and now, with my company's growing visibility, they were probing not just for funds, but for vulnerabilities. I had always anticipated risk in business, but this was personal. Daniel and I convened an emergency meeting with the executive team. This is a high-tension scenario, I said. We are under scrutiny from an unknown source. No panicking, no guessing. Every action must be deliberate. Treat this like a live threat, not just for finances, but to our credibility. A few minutes into the session, a text alert arrived. Another attempt, timed to coincide with my family's viewing of the new press coverage. The sender of the attempts had intimate knowledge of my schedule. Someone had orchestrated this, carefully monitoring both my personal and professional life. I felt my pulse spike. Not fear, not desperation. Focus. That evening, I decided to confront the situation strategically. I called the bank's fraud department directly, elevating the incident to a full investigation. Simultaneously, I engaged a private cybersecurity firm. They would monitor the activity, trace all connections, and prepare for potential escalation. I instructed Daniel to implement real-time anomaly alerts for every employee account. Everyone in my team knew the stakes, and their focus was unshakable. But control wasn't just about defense, it was about narrative. I decided that whoever was testing me would not be allowed to gain leverage. They would learn that visibility, achievement, and preparation were shielded by strategy. The next morning, news broke. An anonymous post on a small financial forum mentioned the large building purchase and implied possible impropriety. My inbox flooded with messages, journalists, competitors, and curious observers questioning the legitimacy of the transaction. I read through them with a practiced calm. Each message reinforced one truth: perception is only as strong as your preparation, and my preparation had been meticulous. I composed a controlled public statement emphasizing transparency, regulatory compliance, and the official nature of the transaction. By the time the day ended, the narrative had shifted back to recognition and legitimacy, neutralizing the speculative thread. But the personal tension remained. I called my parents again. "This isn't just business," I said. "It's targeted. Someone has been monitoring our family network. You need to remain vigilant. Do not discuss anything financial, do not confirm any transactions, and do not engage with unsolicited inquiries." My father's voice was tight. "We're trying, but it's unsettling." "Good," I replied. "Let that unease sharpen your awareness. Threats exist in subtlety, not just in overt action." I hung up, knowing the real challenge had only begun. By the following week, the security team had traced some access attempts to multiple devices within a small radius. Analysis indicated that the attempts were coordinated, using both social engineering and technical probing. The implication was clear. This was no random attacker. This was someone meticulously assessing vulnerabilities. I realized then that my family's skepticism, my brother's doubts, and even past humiliations had been micro-lessons in resilience. Every misadjustment, every dismissal, every accusation of unemployment had fortified me. And now that resilience was being tested under pressure of direct scrutiny. Late Friday evening, I gathered my executive team for a high-intensity session. "This is the ultimate test of operational control," I said. "You will treat every alert as if it is real. Every login, every access attempt, every external communication will be verified. Failure is not an option. Reputation and security are inseparable. We cannot afford assumption. We can only act decisively." We worked late into the night, triangulating IP addresses, cross-referencing log accesses, and fortifying digital defenses. Daniel kept me updated continuously. Each alert neutralized, each attempt logged, every thread of attack mapped meticulously. By 2 a.m., I leaned back in my chair. Exhaustion was physical, but clarity was mental. I knew that visibility brought scrutiny, scrutiny brought challenge, and challenge, handled correctly, reinforced authority. Saturday dawned clear and bright, but tension still lingered. The press coverage remained neutral, family interactions were measured, and my team was vigilant. I received a call from my father in the early afternoon. "You handled the situation," he said quietly. We are impressed." Impressed isn't enough, I replied. You need to understand vigilance and strategy. Recognition is easy. Control is hard. He exhaled. I understand. My mother's voice followed. We're proud. And Mark, of course, remained silent, but I knew he was calculating. That night, standing on the rooftop terrace, the city sprawled beneath me like a grid of opportunity and danger. I reflected on the culmination of the past few weeks: Thanksgiving humiliation, the bank alerts, family doubt, public recognition, and now direct external threat. Every moment had led to a single, undeniable truth. Success, when visible, is tested relentlessly. But with preparation, strategy, and unwavering focus, scrutiny transforms into opportunity, not weakness. And for the first time, I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. Because the lesson was clear: power, perception, and vigilance are inseparable. The highest stakes always arrive, but when you are prepared, nothing can unseat you. The next week unfolded with a strange mixture of relief and anticipation. The immediate threat, the unauthorized access attempts, the anonymous forum posts, the probing inquiries, had been neutralized. My team had executed flawlessly. The cybersecurity firm had secured every system, and the bank confirmed there had been no compromise. Yet the tension lingered, subtle, a reminder that visibility comes with scrutiny, and that scrutiny can strike unexpectedly. I spent the first morning reviewing reports with Daniel. All alerts contained, no breaches, logs fully secured. Good, I said, letting the word hang, but inside I felt the deeper significance. This wasn't just a victory over a potential hacker. It was a symbolic closure of the Thanksgiving chapter, of my family's disbelief, of every assumption that I was incapable, unstable, or unprepared. Every system I fortified, every alert I logged was a statement: I am here, I am capable, and I am untouchable when prepared. That evening, I invited my parents to the building again, not for a tour, but for conversation. The mood was intentionally informal: a small dinner in the rooftop lounge, warm lighting, soft music, and city lights twinkling below. They arrived cautiously, still calibrating their perception of me. My father, usually measured and stern, arrived first, followed by my mother, tentative but curious. Mark lingered at the edge, observing, calculating. I poured wine, and we sat together in silence for a moment. Then I spoke. Thanksgiving was hard for all of us, I began. The words that were said, the assumptions that were made, they mattered, and they shaped me more than they shaped you. My mother reached for my hand, eyes misted. We underestimated you, she said softly. We judged you by appearances, not by effort or capability. I nodded. I know, and it's not just about underestimation, it's about understanding the consequences of assumptions, because they can limit you, and those around you. Mark cleared his throat, finally engaging. So all the work, all the growth, it wasn't luck. I smiled faintly. No, it was deliberate. Every step, every risk, every late night, every moment counted. And the truth is, I didn't need permission to succeed, but I did need clarity, and clarity came through proving myself, not asking for validation. The dinner progressed, conversation flowing more naturally. My parents asked thoughtful questions about company strategy, investor relations, and long-term growth. Mark asked about metrics and milestones. I answered candidly, providing insight without condescension, offering transparency without overexposure. It struck me how subtly dynamics had shifted. They no longer saw me as the unemployed daughter who needed guidance. They were witnessing an autonomous force, capable, deliberate, and confident. And that recognition, earned, observed, and undeniable, was profoundly liberating. After dinner, we stepped out onto the rooftop terrace. The city sprawled below, alive with movement, lights flickering like a constellation of ambition and possibility. I turned to my father. "You've seen the work, you've witnessed the growth. What do you see now?" He paused, considering carefully. "I see someone who refused to be defined by others' perceptions, someone who transformed doubt into strategy, criticism into fuel. I see you." I let the words settle. Recognition at last, not blind pride, not indulgent approval, but comprehension. My mother added, softly, "We're proud, truly, and I see now that our doubts were not yours to bear, only ours to overcome." Mark remained silent again, but I sensed the recalculation. Perhaps envy, perhaps admiration, perhaps both, but the dynamics had shifted irreversibly. The lesson of Thanksgiving, the bank alerts, the scrutiny, and the public recognition crystallized in my mind. Resilience is built in solitude, tested in visibility. Perception will always lag behind achievement, especially among those closest to you. Trust, once fractured, requires deliberate repair, but recognition can be earned through action, not persuasion. Vigilance is the cost of visibility, but preparation converts threats into confirmation of capability. These truths became my guiding principles, not just for business, but for life. Over the next few weeks, I implemented subtle but impactful changes. Internal protocols were tightened, digital defenses reinforced, and every financial transaction was logged with transparency and security. My team was empowered to act decisively. My parents, now quietly observing rather than questioning, had become allies in understanding the stakes of leadership and visibility. Mark, slowly, was learning that success could not be bypassed, only earned through deliberate execution. The narrative had shifted irreversibly. I was no longer the underestimated daughter. I was the founder, the strategist, the visionary who could navigate scrutiny, family expectations, and market pressures with composure. One evening, alone on the rooftop terrace, I reflected on the full arc of the journey. Thanksgiving had been a crucible of humiliation. The bank alerts had been tests of vigilance. Family skepticism had been a mirror reflecting both limitation and opportunity. Public recognition had been the catalyst for recalibration. And finally, direct external scrutiny had been the ultimate proving ground. Through it all, I had realized success is never about avoiding judgment or scrutiny. It's about mastering the response to them. It's about transforming pressure into clarity, doubt into strategy, and observation into empowerment. I thought of the building itself, glass, steel, and ambition, a monument not to wealth, but to persistence, strategy, and self-determination. Each office, each conference room, each detail was a testament to the work done when others refused to see it, when others assumed failure, when the world doubted capability. Standing there, I allowed a rare moment of quiet pride, not arrogance, not vindication, pride in clarity, pride in resilience, pride in the ability to navigate chaos without losing focus or integrity. The city below pulsed with light and life. I knew the future would bring challenges, threats, and scrutiny, but I was prepared. Thanksgiving would no longer define me. Misjudgments would no longer constrain me. I had learned the essential truth. Validation is temporary. Execution is permanent. Recognition follows strategy. Respect is earned through action. And trust, once rebuilt, is a fortress. With that, I stepped back from the edge of the terrace, letting the night air fill my lungs. I had claimed my narrative, defended my achievement, and fortified my presence. The story was no longer about being underestimated. It was about proving, building, and thriving, without permission, without apology, and without hesitation. The journey began with humiliation and doubt, but it ended in clarity, empowerment, and moral closure. Thanksgiving had tested me, but it had also taught me the most valuable lesson of all, that when you act with strategy, integrity, and resilience, no misjudgment by family, society, or circumstance can unseat you. And as the city lights reflected in the glass of the building I had purchased, I smiled, knowing that this was only the beginning.